Welcome to Emergent Behavior, where we explore this moment in time just before artificial intelligence changes the world as we know it, where we talk to the builders and creators, entrepreneurs and engineers, where we ask questions to which we don't actually know the answers to. I'm your host, Prakash Narayanan, known on Twitter as AdaPie. Hello and welcome to Emergent Behavior. I'm excited to have with us today Steve Ruiz, the founder and CEO of TLDraw, an innovative startup that's transforming the landscape of collaborative digital whiteboards and canvas experiences. Steve is a visionary in the realm of web-based design tools and interactive experiences. With a background in art and a passion for making technology more accessible, he's leading the charge in creating powerful yet intuitive tools for visual communication and ideation. In this conversation, we explore TLDraw's journey from an open source project to a venture-backed startup, the revolutionary Make Real feature that allows users to transform sketches into functional prototypes using AI, how TLDraw is pushing the boundaries of what's possible with browser-based technologies, Steve's insights on the future of human-AI collaboration in design and development, and the challenges and opportunities in creating extensible, developer-friendly tools for visual communication. Whether you're a developer interested in the latest advancements in web-based tools, a designer curious about the future of prototyping, or an entrepreneur fascinated by the intersection of AI and creativity, this episode is packed with valuable insights. Steve represents a unique blend of artistic vision and technical expertise, driving innovation at the forefront of visual collaboration tools. His work at TLDraw is not just about creating better whiteboards, it's about reimagining how we ideate, communicate, and bring ideas to life in this digital age. To explore TLDraw's groundbreaking technology, visit TLDraw.com or follow their journey on Twitter at TLDraw. As always, if you enjoy the show, the number one thing you can do to support us is to follow Emergent Behavior on Apple Podcasts. Every follow massively boosts our reach. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at emergentbehavior.co to stay up to date on all our latest episodes, including my research and preparation notes for each podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at numeric8 TEAPI. Without further ado, please enjoy this illuminating conversation with TLDraw founder Steve Ruiz on the future of visual collaboration and AI-assisted design. So, Steve, what is TLDraw?
TLDraw is, well, it's a couple of different things. It's a startup based here in London, about 10 people. Well, we've just raised our Series A. So it is also a JavaScript library for building whiteboards and whiteboard-like things, kind of like an SDK for building your own infinite canvas experience, or for building something that is like a whiteboard, but maybe with a little bit of your own code or your own feature set on top. And then we have our glorified demo of TLDraw SDK on TLDraw.com. So that is like a free, zero friction, no login, even if you wanted to, whiteboard that you can go do some diagramming either alone or for free with other people. And yeah, kind of like a Miro / FigJam experience, but very fast, very in the browser. Just send a link and you're right there. You're inside of it. And then we also do a lot of other demos on top of the core SDK, some of which use AI, and some of those have gotten quite popular. So the one that we're best known for is called Make Real. Make Real was a little app that we made with TLDraw where you could draw a user interface, click a button, and then get like a working prototype back. And so, yeah, it's definitely there's a couple of different TLDraw things that we're calling TLDraw, but the main thing is that, yeah, we build this like this kind of like core whiteboard like SDK that's super hackable and can do a lot of other things. And then like now it's pretty mature, so we're just like doing stuff with it and trying to share the story and get people inspired to build their own stuff with it as well. All of the stuff that I did in open source and kind of like these side projects really rolled into each other. So for example, the right before TLDraw, I had built an app called Globs. It's still up, globs.design, where you can, it's basically like a creative app canvas, but the only thing that you have to work with is this one primitive called a glob, which is like these two circles that are connected by two Bezier curves. And I was building that because I had previously been working on an algorithm for freehand ink called Perfect Freehand, which is like, if you're writing with an iPad pencil or something and you want the ink to get kind of like thicker or thinner depending on pressure, and you're doing that for some reason in vector space, like there really wasn't a solution there. So I was working on that problem. And in order to build that, I had to figure out this globs thing. So I built globs, and that kind of story keeps like going back further and further with different side projects that kind of like led one into the next. But after globs, I'd wanted to build, like, I'm like, oh, this is cool. I have like a little mini Figma. The only thing that is that it like only works with globs. So I'm gonna start making a kind of a primitive agnostic whiteboard, something that I could just hack whenever I want to add something new, a new type of shape. I could just like extend it very easily, and I'll make it an open source, and it'll just sort of be this like, yeah, like a solution to a little missing piece of the open source landscape, which is like having to do with whiteboards and canvases and these sort of infinite canvas type of experiences. That's how it started, but it immediately got a lot of attention and a lot of interest from companies where, like, if you wanted to build, I'm doing a podcast, so I'll think about podcasts, like a visual way of managing audio content, right? And be like, yeah, I kind of want it to work a little bit like Miro, but still have sticky notes and stuff, but also have like audio content on the canvas and let me like manage all the different interviews or something that I did. Great idea, cool. But previously, in order to build that, you would have to build like all of Miro's canvas in order to have your little tiny like unique bit on top. So like you'd still have to make selection work the same way. You'd have to make all the like sticky notes and all that stuff, copy and paste, undo, redo, all these like really tough collaboration, like really tough problems. None of which were like unique, and like no one was going to notice that like, oh, you did a really good job with erasing, um, because it's essentially like a commodified experience, but you just have to build it all yourself. And I don't know if you also build software, but like those are exactly the parts that like folks don't want to do. They want to do the things that are unique to the products that they're working on. And so I thought TLDraw could kind of slot in and provide that bit of code. And it turned out that a lot of people had ideas for building these things, but didn't have the time or patience or budget to build like the whole thing themselves. That's where I was at in May 2021 of like, okay, cool. I'll just like kind of gap shoot a little bit and take this code that I had written before and adapt it to something more extensible. But it very quickly realized that like other people wanted this thing.
So, Steve, let's take a step back here. And so it's May. You have this GitHub project. How does that transform into this thing that takes over Twitter, takes over the internet? Like what's the process there? How did that happen?
So I kept it closed at first. I started working on it in May, but I didn't open it up open source until November. What was happening at the time was like I was contracting, working in design tools, and because of like previous open source stuff we're starting to get some attention. And I was just sharing this stuff on Twitter all the time, like tweet. I kind of like became like an expert of recording like an 8-second GIF that showed some like part of like user experience, like design or functionality or micro interaction type of thing. And the fun part about either working on this digital ink and then arrows and then these design tool interactions is that like you can kind of figure them out. Like you can kind of like visually learn them very quickly, and it's pretty cool. So that content was doing well. A couple of bigger companies in the design space were trying to recruit me at the same time, which was great. Love Figma, great product. I have a lot of friends who work there, and now a lot of investors who used to work there as well. But yeah, like those types of companies were talking to me, and so I said, okay, you know what, this looks fun. I'm going to let these guys like negotiate, amongst themselves and like compete the price up a little bit. Let me go full time on TLDraw until that works itself out. And so I went full time on it in July, and then immediately got some corporate funding from a very large corporation who was like, we kind of need something like this. Can we just give you money to do it? I gave them, fairly what felt at the time to be a high price, but I'm pretty sure I could have added a zero at the end. Damn. But and because it was so public, like that was my lead gen. Like that was like how people got into it. I set up GitHub sponsors so that people could have early access to the TLDraw like .com demo/app for like $1. And then after 100 of those, I bumped it to $10, and I think at the peak it was something like over 5,000 pounds. I'm in London. 5,000 pounds a month of GitHub sponsorships, which was absolutely like, I mean, that platform is very interesting, but like very few people have like made it work in the way that it was working for me, which was fantastic. Then when I finally did open source it and put it out on GitHub, that was in November. By then I had signed a contract, but I also said like, hey, I'm not going to start until January. And they were like, well, that sucks, but okay, yeah, cool. I'll see you in January. And I published everything, MIT license, just kind of like YOLO'd it in end of November. And which is a terrible time to launch something, but it worked out for us. It went quite viral on Twitter, social media, but also on like Hacker News. It was like #1 on Hacker News, and there was just a lot of like enthusiasm around this project, both because it was like oh cool, I can use this on TLDraw.com, and I can do collaboration with for free, and that's great. And I put a lot of care into like the interactions and like the craft and quality of it. But also because I had designed it from the very beginning to be an SDK for this type of thing. So it was very easy to extend. It was very easy to customize. And then finally, because the canvas itself in TLDraw was and still is just like normal website stuff. So it looks like it's like, Figma Miro style canvas, which is rendered more like a video game is rendered. It's like a frame that's being repainted 6 times a second for various reasons, most of them being like high performance reasons, like a video game. But with TLDraw, like the canvas is like just normal website stuff. It's like HTML and CSS, like SVGs. It's literally if you're a web developer, it's literally like a React app all the way down. So everything you see is like a little React component, which is fun because now you can design those little widgets and all your customizations with React, which is easy to write with versus like, I don't know, custom graphic rendering like software. Like you have text wrapping, you have videos, like it's trivial to put in. Anything that you can put in a website, you could put on the canvas. And so from an SDK customization standpoint, I think that really got people excited to be like, oh my God, like the browser is so good these days that you can actually build essentially like a Figma style canvas using like normal browser stuff, normal web content. And the bet on that tech or misusing the tech in that way has turned out to be a big part of like, why people choose this software, and also like the nature of what you can do with it. I think Make Real is a great example of that, actually.
So we have Make Real. It is you can have an OpenAI or Anthropic key. You can go to TLDraw. You can put in the key at the beginning, and then after that you can create. You can draw out, let's say, a timer or some other small web app, and then you can give instructions to it. You can kind of circle it, and you can just click on this button, Make Real, and you basically have this thing that generates kind of the UI from your sketch, and it works. Like some of the background coding, if it's a simple, if it's fairly simple, like a calculator or something which doesn't require an API call, you can just it just kind of works in browser, and it's kind of a magical experience. It's really a magical experience. So when you first encountered OpenAI, and the functionality, how did you think about, hey, I can do this Make Real thing? How did that concept work?
Right. So it's kind of a good story there. We had played around, like, okay, when I started in TLDraw in like 2021, I think that was like GPT-2 era, maybe by then. So it was pretty early on, and it wasn't until like maybe the end of 2022 that was the first time that we started thinking about the canvas and AI together. But at that point, like the canvas was like the target in a way. Like we could use a language model to generate a mermaid.js, diagram, and then we could render that using, whatever, essentially TLDraw as part of a different like rendering pipeline, so that you could go from like, in theory, like a prompt, like, hey, give me a diagram of a chess match or something like that, and end up with things on the canvas, right? Like shapes and text. I didn't find that incredibly inspiring, I guess, because I was still like text prompting it, and I was like, yeah, okay, well, we don't need to invest too much on this. Let's just focus on the SDK. And it wasn't until the vision models started coming out, like GPT-4 with vision, that we started getting like some ideas about how this stuff might work together. Like at the time, when those first came out, they weren't actually they weren't available to developers. They were only in like the GPT-4 or ChatGPT app. So we were like taking pictures of the TLDraw whiteboard and in ChatGPT and being like, hey, what's going on here? Like, can you tell me something about this whiteboard? And we'd be able to come back with really good information. Like, wow, it could really, really parse this picture really well. It's shocking. And so when the API was finally released, it was a designer, actually, a guy named Sawyer Hood from Figma, who was working at Figma at the time, a developer, who basically the next day took TLDraw and came up with the kind of the first version of like Draw UI, where it was you drew a wireframe, you clicked a button, and that would submit that wireframe that you drew to GPT-4 with vision, along with like a prompt like, hey, you're an expert web developer, Tailwind developer, whatever. Here's a design. Come back with a working HTML prototype, and it just would, like, it came back with code. Like, it could write the code, and it worked, which was awesome. Like, the buttons were clickable. It was like a real little website. And so when we saw that, we got really excited because, one, hey, TLDraw, like, is being used in this thing that's going viral and is like awesome. But two, like, because we're just really familiar with what the SDK can do, we're like, this could be so much better. Like, we could go so much further with this. And so we kind of forked it. We started working on it. And one of the first things that we did was that when you would, in Sawyer's project, when you would like click this button, it would come back with a website. It would just kind of put that website in a big iframe, that like a embedded website inside of the main website, like kind of sitting in front of it, like a big new pop-up window that had your prototype in it, which was cool. But like, because our canvas is normal web stuff, like, we knew that you could put that website that was just created back on the canvas. So websites can embed other websites. They're called iframes. And normally it's only used in things like banks for security, but you can do it with whatever you want, like have a website inside of a website. And in our case, like, you draw your thing, you click the button, and now, as another like just shape on the canvas, here comes your the result of that query, like the HTML, the whole website that GPT-4 came up with. And then, because it's on the canvas, like, you could draw on top of it, or you could like annotate it. You could add more context, and then take that website and your annotations and markup, and then submit that as the new prompt, and then get back another website and repeat. And so it was like, once we started doing that, and once we realized that was even possible, and the prompt was something like, hey, here's a basically like a marked up version of your previous design. Could you incorporate the annotations and the feedback into a new version of your prototype? And so it would like change what it had done before. We'd also send it like the HTML, its previous response. And so it was able to change what it had done before in order to incorporate the feedback. So like, you draw a login page, click a button, get back a login window, and then you point an arrow towards one of the buttons and say like, hey, make this green. And then you submit that as a second response. You get back a same version of the login window, but this time the button's green. And people went nuts with that. Like it did like 20 million or 22 million views in like 7 days on Twitter, and then like hundreds of like I think we had like 1 million people click that make real button. Of course, these APIs were like in preview. Like you only had like 30, I think, requests per day, and so it was impossible to actually build a real product around this. And so, like, even if we had wanted to like sponsor the or just like cover the costs for this thing, like we wouldn't have been able to, because again, like each API key only gets like 30 requests per day. So instead, just because I did want to have people like play with this, I just put up a little text field at the bottom of the interface that said like, yeah, just go to OpenAI, get your own API key, and then plug it in here. I think it had a label like risky but cool. Like normally don't put your API keys into random websites, but I don't know, if you wanted to play with Make Real, you had to. And people did. Some people did, and some people couldn't figure that out and had problems. A lot of like normal people don't know or care what a API key is. So it was like a lot of like our Discord was just full of like questions like, what the hell are you got? Like what I have to go to a different website and give them $5 and then come back to your website in order to use your website. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. This is how it works. But it was completely chaotic. Went insanely viral. And I think for a lot of people, it was like, the feedback that we got was a lot of people this was their first time ever making something with technology, like ever making a website, ever making something that worked, ever making something interactive. And even folks who like worked in tech, like we had a lot of product managers and project managers who like just fell in love with this thing because they're used to communicating, here's what I kind of want to see, or here's what I kind of think we should build. Like, go build that, and then we'll have a conversation about it. Or like, give me a prototype, and so that we have something to talk about. And now they could do that themselves. And I mean, like, the results are not putting anyone out of work. Like, they're like kind of bad but awesome. And like, but folks showed me like here, because there's this like workflow, right? You can iterate on it. You can draw on top of what you get back. And I would see these things of like, 50 generations later, like we have a working video game or something. Or like, look, me and my kid worked together and built a website, and they just like, it was like a canvas with all this like treeing out like different experiments, and it was fascinating to see. And I felt like it was so good that it was clearly like, I mean, we probably could have stopped and built a SaaS app around Make Real, but it felt like something that was not. It felt more like a pattern rather than a product. This idea of using a canvas as the input to a language model, like a multimodal language model, just seemed like obviously this is the way that people are going to be doing stuff, right? Like there's a certain type of communication that like just makes the most sense to do it via drawing or annotation. And it worked for like we were taking screenshots of databases and saying like, yeah, just crossing out one of the columns and asking for a schema migration, like the code necessary to actually affect that change, and it would just do it. It was like, yeah, of course I can do that. And so it really felt like something that needed to be put into other people's hands in the same way that we're kind of putting the SDK into people's hands and saying, look, now making canvases is easy. What are you going to make with it? We felt the same way about Make Real. So we created a kind of like a starter kit, a repo that anyone could take and basically just skip right to the implementation stage of Make Real, but like customize it either for their own purpose, so that instead of making any website, now you're only making kind of like link in bio type of websites, or I want to use this to do database work, or whatever it is. Using the canvas as like that input to the model, and then also getting the model's results back and putting it back on the canvas and having that loop. And that's been great. Yeah.
Now, would you call that programming?
It feels like it. In the sense of like, telling a machine what you want it to do, yeah, I think the hard part previously to that, yeah. So there's a couple of things which had made code generation difficult for me, specifically difficult for me. One is having to like refer to things like, hey, make that button that's second from the left that says submit, make that red, you know, or bigger, but like bigger doesn't really make sense. Like, cause I knew what I wanted. I just couldn't communicate it. Um, and then also having to like start over from scratch every time. Uh, and then like copy and paste that code into an editor and like run it. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to do in order to, even if you can get a language model to like create code, there's still like steps you need to take in order to actually evaluate it or to use it. And so it wasn't like a workflow. It wasn't like a no type of code generation. Even these days with like Claude's artifacts, which is awesome. Like it doesn't feel like a it doesn't feel like I'm programming in the sense of like making small decisions and iteratively like improving something. I think make real, especially if the inference time was like 0 or something like that. Like it's all the control that you could really ask for is there. You're able to do all the things that like you're able to work within that system in order to produce results that you want. So yeah, I'd call that a type of programming for sure.
So we have a kind of programming here, and there's been a lot of soul searching. There's been a lot of people who are saying, don't do computer science. This is not the right time. And just a lot of angst about whether computer science is a career, programming is a career, is even something that people are going to be doing, going forward. So looking at how, TLDraw has kind of made this entire process so much easier for even people who don't write code now to produce software. What would you say? Would you advise someone to go into computer science now or no?
Absolutely. It's funny because before this, I mean, I say, yeah, go study computer science, but I have like 2 art degrees, so I'm not a like I definitely don't have a computer science background. But when I started my career in tech, the thing that I was doing was like design prototyping. So creating essentially throwaway code code-based designs for interactions, just things that like you needed to build something. There was no way to evaluate it or design it based on like just a sketch file or something like that. Like you needed to play around in the code a little bit to figure out how this worked. And using tools that were really trying to make the type of decision making that you do with code accessible to designers and accessible to like non-programmers. Basically just trying to like lower the bar as much as possible. Basically trying to lower the bar as much as possible for like how can we make people productive with programming. And yeah, I feel like it doesn't get much lower than just drawing a box, writing the word login on it, and then clicking a button. like, um, like, and the fun part is that um, I don't know, by leveraging things that people are able to do very well uh, already, like that type of like with TLDraw, I didn't have to teach anyone how to draw, boxes or anything, and the tool is somewhat self-explanatory, especially if you've used any other like canvas-based tool before. So yeah, I think the thing that language models and other kind of like AI machine learning models like these days give us is a way of producing results by other means, and maybe that is yeah, in the same way that like prompt engineering has sort of like become this bizarre skill of like describing pictures, like in very semi-technical terms of like whatever this is the type of camera and the type of light and the type of bokeh that I want and all this stuff. Like I don't know. I think with Make Real and with programming in general, I don't think that high priesthood is going anywhere. But what is achievable by other means, either by drawing, by language, by describing, I think we're working on right now a kind of like conversational canvas experience where you can kind of like talk back and forth with the essentially a language model that's running on the canvas, almost like as a collaborator, like draw this, no, move it over there, like do this type of thing, right? Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, like the voice text, like however we get the text in, like we need it to, um, we basically just having like an agentic collaborator experience on the canvas. Um, and that's just for us, but I think that's going to be for for anything. I guarantee you're going to see a talk to your website and edit your website by talking to it type of a product, like which is great because yeah, as long as there's like that feedback loop, as long as there's that like iteration cycle, as long as you can say like, okay, cool, now do this, and then like, okay, cool, never mind, go back a step, let's change something else. Um, yeah, like people build websites by hiring other people to build their websites for them. Like we we must have some way of like communicating like what we want and evaluating it and dialing it in. Um, and yeah, I guess that's just going to happen more with software.
So take a step back, Steve. Why London?
So I moved here because my wife got a postdoctorate position here, and then we stayed here because I don't know, I liked it and started a family here. Have a nice house. Um, sorry, we don't have a nice house. We rent a small flat, but it's a nice flat. And and then yeah, I think even though TLDraw is like an American parent, there's a UK sub, and everyone who well, not everyone anymore. 9 out of 10 people work here in London. We have a big office. It's really nice. If you're in London, definitely let me know. We have events here. We also just people come here and
Do you collaborate with the Google DeepMind team?
yeah, we do increasingly actually. The we have 2 people on our team whose basically their full-time job is to play with TLDraw and make content. It's not a total description of their job, but that's what it feels like 90% of the time. So our Twitter feed, for example, is like really, really, really active in part because we have 2 people whose only job it is to like, like, hey, figure out how conversational UI should work on the canvas with an agentic model or something like that, and tweet about it. Like, and so we've talked to them just kind of as we like whenever we're playing with like some of the Gemini models and things like that. It's really great to be able to, regardless of who the model provider is, like it's really nice to be able to connect to the teams who are working on the models and kind of who are like having different functionality that's either non-obvious, like what is this thing good at that isn't like obvious just by looking at it. So for example, Gemini Flash has this amazing like bounding box training set, and like we've been able to do some really cool stuff. A couple of weeks ago, we did the like Apple WWDC in June announced this like you could do a calculator app where you can like the model will solve your calculation, and we
So as soon as you guys saw a calculator there, you were like, we can do it too.
yeah. I mean, we just like again, this is kind of the fun part about having a little bit of capacity to just to play. Yeah, Lou Wilson, aka Toad Pond, who has one of those like extremely fun roles here. It's just like, all right, I'm just going to do calculators this week, and had been working with the Gemini 1.5 Flash, and it has that ability to like do bounding boxes, figure out where things are and what those things are, and then really that's all the information you need in order to build a working calculator. Like just what's on the screen, and then like where's the the equal sign, and then let's get the answer and just pop it in right next to the equal sign. And of course, what's fun is like models are super smart, so we could do things like this drawing of an apple equals 4. So what is apple times apple? And it would be like 16, obviously, and it's like so cool. Uh, so yeah, so we've talked to DeepMind like within those types of conversations.
How do you decide what's important, which features, or what to work on that is going to be important and be in the current release?
I don't know. I think we make some of that decision based on what we're working on. And to be fair, like the majority of our like engineering time is on like normal SDK features. So even though we've done a bunch of AI demos, we've also shipped at the same time, like in the last couple of weeks, like a level of detail system for images, so that use smaller images as the image themselves get smaller because you zoom out. We've done this like dynamic resizing mode, so that the size of your ink is always scaled inversely to your zoom level, which makes it seem like the ink is always the same whether you zoom in or zoom out. But of course, if you zoom in, draw something, zoom out, draw something, like the thing that you drew when you were zoomed in is very small compared to the thing that you did when you were zoomed out. So anyway, it's like we're still like shipping normal features because we have like actual customers and like an actual roadmap. But the AI stuff, I mean, it's Flash, but it's recently. I think it's like there's probably a little bit of like vibe surfing or like hype surfing. So when these last couple of weeks, Claude, Sonnet 3.5 came out, and that has a lot better like spatial awareness, a lot better like kind of ability to like visualize things, quote unquote. Like you could ask it to give me an SVG of like a unicorn cat, and it would kind of come up with something that looks a lot better than maybe what some of the earlier models had come up with. And what's funny is that like that, if you had asked it for some like give me a XML description of an image of a visual of a cat or something like that, unicorn cat, it would come up with basically the same drawing no matter what you ask it for. So it has this sort of, to anthropomorphize a little bit, like it's consistent in what it thinks a unicorn cat looks like, and I so yeah, this was the first time. Up to now, Make Real had only been GPT-4, but I started kind of like making each prompt return 2 different results, one from GPT-4o and another from Claude, so that like I could compare and evaluate like the results. And indeed, Claude is better at the moment, or at least the prompt that we're using, it produces better results. And so just like 2 days ago, or maybe even like yesterday, I finished shipping the that as an actual feature. So now on Make Real, you can go and say like, I want to use Claude, or I want to use Open or GPT-4, or I want to use both, and like let's make them fight. And so I think we may continue to add like contenders in that sense to Make Real. I think it's really important that models be able to do this type of thing, and this kind of like qualitative analysis. I don't know. I know folks at OpenAI like the challenge. I know folks at Anthropic like the challenge. And as long as it puts eyes on TLDraw, and as long as it like is interesting, I see no reason not to just bring more and more models into the fight, so to speak.
When you had these AI models kind of emerge, did you all of a sudden find that you had built something that they kind of locked on perfectly to, and somewhat surprisingly, you hadn't planned for this, but it was such a perfect match that this kind of magic started happening?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have 2 things going for us. One is, again, like the big one is, yeah, we just built it from the ground up to be extensible, which, by the way, is a nightmare. And like, I think I probably could have built the same end user experience of like TLDraw.com in maybe like 30% of the time if I hadn't also been like designing APIs and hadn't been like having conversations about extensibility and what will an end user be able to do with this, tool that, beyond like what we're going to do with it, and where are those seams and which parts are internal, which parts are public, all that stuff. It's like a really, really large project, most of which is like always an API design question. But since it is,
What were the hardest parts to this?
I think the hardest part is figuring out which parts of a given system need to be extensible and which don't. So, for example, we had arrows. TLDraw has like really good arrows. I have obsessed over our arrows, and hopefully that's produced something that's really, really nice. You have an arrow pointing to a shape, you move that shape, and the arrow will update to keep pointing at the spot that it's pointing to. And if you delete that shape, then of course that relationship goes away. If you undo that delete, like the relationship comes back, and you can move the thing again. If you copy and paste a shape and an arrow that's connected to it, then the thing that you paste has that same relationship over here, right? Like you can move this one, the arrow will move correctly. And so arrows had this really complicated life cycle or complicated system of relationships with other shapes. And over the last couple of months, honestly, this was like a 6-month job, but we were extracting that into a generic API that allowed any shapes to have any relationships with another, like basically allowed an end user to do that type of shape, like our arrow, from scratch for themselves. And it's hard to describe exactly like why this is so hard, but it's also hard to describe why it's so interesting. This would be the foundation of things like constraints and constraint solvers, of like noodle type of patch programming like you'd find in something like Unity, fixed alignment type of systems where like you move and all the other things move with it, drag and drop layout algorithms, like having these relationships between entities within this sort of like, or building like a graph or something like that, right? I mean, we have like pins that you could put in stuff, and now they're pinned together. And moving from like, here's how an arrow behaves to like, here's how this new abstraction called a binding behaves, takes a lot of like analysis, and also just like design sympathy of like, okay, well, of all the different ways that we could implement this, which is the way that makes the most sense within the context of the rest of our code and the rest of our design decisions, and like will still allow people to do what they want to do. And also, what do people want to do with this? It's really tough. Same thing with like camera controls is something we shipped recently that allowed you to basically build something like Keynote, or the preview app with PDFs where like the zooming and panning logic is different whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, and all these types of things just are like, TLDraw, the app or the default experience or something, is just like kind of like one of many, many, many possible things that you can do with a canvas. And I think the design challenge of TLDraw as library authors is like, okay, well, what tools do we need to make available so that people can build as much as possible their own their own thing on the canvas, without having to say like, TLDraw has like 99% of what I need, but there's no way for me to make custom arrows. Thus, my only choice again is to like start from scratch. And like that's that seems like a waste. So slowly we're kind of like expanding the types of projects, the types of products that could be built with our tech. And if again, like the best place to look to see what people are building with this is our Twitter. But I mean, folks are making like computers like on the canvas with
Like basically Minecraft.
the kind of the Redstone equivalent, where like, oh cool, you can make a circuit now, and then folks went and built an entire computer with it. It wasn't meant for that, or it wasn't designed with that in mind, but when you're designing these primitives, like I am constantly shocked and incredibly pleased at what folks are building with TLDraw, including like the really far out stuff. But yeah, definitely a design challenge. And I'm glad that there's, let's just say I'm really glad to be now and not at the beginning of that challenge, because it was a lot of work. And now I get to see what you can do with it, rather than constantly be telling everyone like, no, trust me, it'll be cool. We just have to build it first.
What are the, two or three things that you pay, you kind of keep in the back of your mind and you always refer to, every day? Kind of, is it like statistics or some kind of rule, or is there something that you constantly remind yourself or you look for all the time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably the highest signal thing that I pay attention to is like what folks are building with the product, and like what they're doing with it. Like, is this for an education product? Are they like replacing something that existed before, or are they building something new? Um, when I look at a product that was some of our customers, I'm looking at like, okay, well, what parts of those did they have to build themselves? And like, are there two customers who had to build the same thing essentially? Like, is there additional undifferentiated work here that like I haven't noticed? Because those are always opportunities for us just to get people closer to where they want to be. Yeah.
So would you say that you choose to build what you see people using?
I think so. I think it's like, yeah, I guess for us, as someone who's like, if I was designing a transportation system to get people to an airport, and I got them, to a point where they still had to walk like the last mile to the airport, like my goal would be to reduce that mile to as short as possible. Like ideally, like in a perfect world, I stick them right into the airplane, right? And everything in between is the sort of the product opportunity for me as an airport person mover. I think with TLDraw, it's the same thing. As like, what is undifferentiated? What would people rather not build and rather buy, so that they could focus their time on the really differentiated part, right? The canvas for audio content type of stuff. So those are the types of things that I'm paying attention to a lot. I always have one eye kind of on the as new models are released, as new vision models like kind of get better, like where like we got quite lucky to be in a place when the vision model came out where like, what you would really need in order to take advantage of this is a hackable canvas that you could, like that also worked with like web content, so that you could put iframes and draw on top of iframes. And we got very lucky to sort of be there in that moment with the thing that needed to be there in order to take advantage of it. So these days I also pay a lot of attention to like those movements and those rumors and those kind of like trends, so that if there is, for example, like if OpenAI drops like a conversational model that like has this kind of flow between prompt and response, like how can we take advantage of that on the canvas? What would we need to have in place in order for that to be able to take advantage of that, and try and like kind of design a few steps ahead, in order to kind of catch the technology when it's available, if we think it's actually going to go in a certain direction.
Steve, thank you so much for your time, and I hope TLDraw is gonna be is gonna execute on so much more, and I hope to see you again soon.
That's awesome. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for kind of letting me talk more about TLDraw. If you want to try it, we are at TLDraw.com. If you want to try the SDK and maybe build something, we are at TLDraw.dev. And then if you want to follow along, we are on Twitter or X at x.com/TLDRAW, TLDraw. Thanks again. Bye.
Emergent behavior is a part of the Turpentine Network. For our full newsletter, visit emergentbehavior.co. For more Turpentine podcasts and sponsorship inquiries, visit turpentine.co